What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And there's a story about a guy named Drifter. Drifter is Juan Soto from Watsonville, VGV, I believe is the name of his hood. Um, and I'm doing this not like, oh, look at this dude, he's a rat, whatever. That's not where I'm going with this. I think it gives you guys a glimpse into how some of these indictments work, how shady the government can be, the pressures that are involved. So it's it's kind of complicated, but I'm gonna simplify it as best as I can and skip a lot of the legalese stuff. And so here's the situation. Before we get into this, right? Uh what is this dude's story? Right? So Drifter ends up in prison for a robbery homicide. Okay. Back in like 2004, he's in Watsonville hanging out with a couple fellas from the neighborhood. And same neighborhood as Baby Joker, right? Which is kind of relevant. That comes up in this. So they're stressing because they need money to pay their regiment dues. Okay. It's like $200. This comes out in the trial. I'll put a link in the description where you can read his whole appellate setup, which gives you all of this that I'm telling you, and then a whole lot more. But I'm not going to get into all of it. But so they decide, look, man, we're going to go rob somebody, right? We ain't got no money. So their plan is to go to Santa Cruz and rob this store. So they go to Santa Cruz from Watsonville, but there's too many people. It's not a good look. And they had noticed some guys playing cards in the parking garage area of an apartment complex. All right, we just go rob them. Right. So they pull up. These couple guys are playing cards. They jump out. They rob them. One of the guys objects. Right. Turns out he's from El Salvador. He sends money back to his family. And so he goes to yank back his $20 bill. And one of the people that are with Drifter knocks his head off. Okay, with a shotgun. And then they leave. Okay, they leave and call the girl, report the car stolen, all the stuff, right? They get busted. Like I said, back in 2004, Baby Joker's out there at the time. And so there's this girl who winds up testifying that, hey, they were trying to get money to pay him, and he came by and beat me up. They wind up charging the girl to kind of force her to testify. And they say, yeah, they got to pay this $200 for their dues, right? The regiment dues. And that's relevant because on appeal, they're arguing this wasn't gang related. And this is how they lost that appeal, right? Is they say, well, no, because, by now it's a few years later. They've been fighting this case for some years. And so they say, well, in 2008, John Mendoza became state's evidence, and he said that Baby Joker runs the Watsonville Regiment, and that he worked for, that he worked for John, and the going rate in 2004 was about $200, right? And so law enforcement is testifying to that, which kind of seals the deal on the gang piece for them. He winds up getting 80 to life, even though he didn't pull the trigger. Okay, so gets 80 to life, goes to prison. Now fast forward. He gets indicted in Operation Quiet Storm. Okay. And while he's in prison, supposedly he becomes an NF member, at least a Cat 1, right? And there's some other people that tell in the case that say that, 2016, 2017, he had some authority in Salinas Valley. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. He gets indicted in Quiet Storm. Quiet Storm was the indictment of the Nuestra Familia, who were centered in the state of California, right? In CDCR. As opposed to the guys that are in the feds. And with these indictments, a whole group was indicted, but there was never really any thought that all those people would go to trial at the same time. Just because you're indicted together doesn't mean you go to trial together. Especially in that case, you wound up having a virus. You couldn't even have that many people in a courtroom. And so part of the delay in the Quiet Storm case has been figuring out, A, who's going to, just take a deal and plead out. And then when we do try these people, what groups are we going to try them in? Okay. And so probably the most notable group that actually went to trial just wrapped up in October. That was with DC and Puppet and a couple other guys. So he's indicted, but he's not indicted for anything other than being a part of the conspiracy. Okay. No specific acts. If you guys remember, count 1 is almost always in a RICO indictment. Count 1 is all these people participate in and further the interest of this criminal enterprise. In this case, it was the NF. And they all do that, right? And they've been doing that since sometime before we know, up until the time when we do this indictment. So wide open window. But then there's specific acts. You know, if these guys are charged with running drugs, these guys are charged with this person, you know, getting assaulted, or this conspiracy to commit murder, or whatever the case may be. Now, Drifter doesn't show up in any of that other stuff, right? Drifter only shows up in the, hey, basically you're an NF member, so you're indicted. And that was it. So he's low level in terms of what he's facing, you know? Now, the way this stuff works is, you know, the feds are talking to everybody, and everybody has their own attorney, you know, and every attorney is looking out for their client more than they are the group. And then obviously the government is looking out for themselves. They want convictions, okay? So Drifter has this attorney, and it's not clear exactly what was said and what wasn't said, but at some point during this process, he makes some statements. He makes some statements to CDCR. He makes some statements to the feds. It would not surprise me if they were kind of flirting with the idea of him cooperating, you know, and it sounds like for at least a minute there, he was 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Okay, but there's this thing called joint defense agreements with these cases, where all the defense attorneys, all the guys that are fighting it still, they work together. They pool their resources, their investigators and stuff, because you're all defending against, for the most part, the same stuff. Okay, maybe you got this crime and you got that crime, but the big issue is the criminal enterprise. So we're on the same page with that. And if you come to a point where you're changing your mind, where you're going to cooperate, well, now you're not a part of the defense anymore. So you need to exit that group, right? You're not allowed to be a part of that. Your attorneys can't sign on to the joint defense agreement anymore if they're talking to the feds and you're cooperating. Now, from the best of my knowledge, Drifter's attorney never backed out of that. Drifter never backed out of that. So through this whole indictment, it has appeared that he was fighting his case, right? That he was staying solid, so to speak. But that's not necessarily the case. That's not actually the case. So the feds are talking to him. He's talking to the feds. Again, for whatever reason, he decides not to go through with it. You know, maybe he got cold feet. I would imagine that there's a lot of emotion involved. Here you have a dude who picked up a life sentence, trying to stay solid and stay in good standings and whatnot. I don't think he intended for somebody to die when he went out there to go do the robbery, but took that on the chin, right? And was like, that's the cost of doing business, the cost of being a homeboy, right? And so he had a level of commitment at some point, and now he's having conversations. He's got this indictment. Again, I would imagine, I've never been in that situation, but I would imagine a lot of emotions involved. And at some point in that, he decides to pull back. Okay, but we already know how the gang shit works. And this isn't I'm putting him on blast or whatever else. I'm not pulling anybody's covers. I'm just using this as an opportunity to kind of show you guys how some of this stuff works, right? This is not breaking news to those that are in the mix. You know, I'm not putting him in danger. He's in Soledad right now, you know, probably going through the whole debriefing process. They can figure out where they're going to put him. So before anybody jumps on that train of me endangering people, no. You'll see. He knew he was in danger. So when you're talking to the feds, right, and you're having these discussions and they're interviewing you, or your attorneys are talking on your behalf, I mean, what kind of deal are you offering? What are you really looking for? Hey, what do you really have against my guy? A lot of that stuff gets filed under seal. It gets filed in such a way that other people don't get to see it. Federal cases are very different than state cases in how all that stuff works, okay? The feds will wind up launching a whole side investigation of some stuff in the middle of warming up for this trial, and they'll bring in witnesses and they'll have hearings and they'll file that stuff under seal for at least a while. Eventually, though, that stuff comes out. So I don't know what he said. But during the trial here, I'll we'll show you what his attorney said. He had one attorney for most of this time, and then like a year ago, he switched to this guy as his attorney. And this guy's pissed because he doesn't work with people who cooperate. And so he's aggravated as well. And I'll show you where he says that. But it says on November 12th, 2024, undersigned stated, and it's weird when they talk in the third person. When you see undersigned, you might as well just say I. And this is Drifter, right? Juan Soto's current attorney writing this. On November 12th, 2024, undersigned stated to Mr. Douch, who's the assistant U.S. attorney running the case, that he understood that defense counsel for the Cervantes group needed to do what they could to defend their clients. But the undersigned noted that Mr. Soto abruptly decided to terminate pretrial litigation on a pending motion to dismiss and forego a trial because Mr. Soto and his wife had been publicly identified during the Cervantes et al. Trial as having communicated with CDCR investigators. So just to clarify that a little bit, Soto, he was going to defend. It looked like this attorney was prepared to fight this case, right? Because there wasn't really anything on him except you're an NF member. And so there was conversations around, like, you don't even know, the government, you haven't shown us anything that even says when he entered into this conspiracy. When did he become an NF member? What has he actually done in furtherance of this criminal enterprise? Like, you don't really have much on my guy except that he's a part of the club, but you need to give us a little bit more. Those conversations were happening. He was going to fight it. Then all of a sudden he turned around just recently, and they dropped count one. They brought in this other charge of like meth trafficking or something. And he pled guilty to that, got 36 months in the feds, credit for time served. And so, like I said, he's sitting in Soledad now, which is normally where the ad seg for Salinas Valley goes these days. I don't think he has the points to be walking around the yard in Soledad. So he's probably in the hole. I think he was in Salinas Valley when he got snatched up on this indictment. But so his time is over. His career is over in terms of him being affiliated, right? And he's not going to wind up doing any Fed time because he has 80 to life to do in the state. And I'm probably just debriefing him and trying to figure out where to house him. But so he did all of a sudden do that. So did that to get it over with and get out of there, I'm sure, and try to protect himself. But it ain't like he paid a big price. But anyways, counsel for the government, or Mr. Soto, was afraid for his family's safety as well as his own. Counsel for the government were aware of Mr. Soto's concern. The undersigned explained that the Soto defense would not agree to the release of any of the Juan Soto filings or the government's filings insofar as they referenced information made available by the Soto defense. The undersigned had in mind that at least one of the exhibits filed by the Soto defense contained statements of concern from an individual about the publication of his declaration to anyone other than the court and counsel for the government. Individuals that the declarant was told by undersigned counsel would respect the confidentiality of the information. Yeah, they lied to him. They lied about respecting the confidentiality. Picture it like this. Like, this is how it seems to me. You guys let me know in the comments if this makes sense. But, it's like you got this lady, right? Meet this lady friend at the bar. And you're married. That's not your wife. And yeah, man, let's go back to the room. And you go back to the room. You start making out. Clothes don't come off. You decide, man, I'm going to leave. I'm cool. I'm not going to do this. Never mind. I got to go. I'll go home to my wife and kids. Now, your wife most likely is going to be like, but that's cheating. That's infidelity, right? You say, but I didn't actually do anything really. Nah, she's probably going to see it that way. Other people won't, right? Other people are like, you didn't hit. You know what I'm saying? You're good. You got cold feet. It's cool. But then imagine that lady friend that you met and went to the room with, she gets pregnant. And now you got to pay child support. But you didn't even hit. But you're paying child support for a kid. Like, do you have to carry the consequence? Right? And when you didn't actually do the thing. Soto didn't testify. He stopped short of becoming a public or full-blown cooperator in Quiet Storm. But he said too much. He did a little too much. And see, with Fed cases, just because you've been found guilty and you're waiting sentencing, that doesn't mean, like in the state, you go to trial, you get found guilty, you get sentenced not too long after that, and very soon after you're sentenced, you're off to the California Department of Corrections, right? And you can file appeals and court cases, and maybe you get back to court, maybe you don't, but you're going to be sitting in a pen while that happens. The feds doesn't necessarily work like that, right? So this Cervantes trial group, these 4 guys that were just found guilty, I think in October, after their trial, the one that Matt and Duck and all them testified in, they're still sitting there and their attorneys are fighting like crazy. And they're wanting to unseal old motions. They're wanting to see if they can pick and find avenues to object to how the trial was done or the evidence or anything else. So they probably heard some stuff and was like, what, was Drifter talking? Hey, and now their attorneys are looking out for them because their attorneys don't care. You know, DC's attorney don't give a shit about Drifter. He cares about DC, right? And I'm just using that name as an example, right? Cervantes. They're all out for themselves. But you are responsible for what your attorney does when you're involved in a criminal lifestyle and you're going to court. You're responsible for what your attorney says and does on your behalf. And a lot of attorneys that handle cases like this understand the dynamics. They may not understand the deep specific politics of this organization versus that organization, but they know what it's like to deal with these populations of people and the stresses and the complications that come behind people wanting to look out for their own safety and everything else. This attorney knows that, clearly. It seems like maybe Soto's first attorney didn't. But now this attorney is pissed. And it was reading this paragraph that led me to decide, man, I'm going to do a video about this, right? Because you don't see stuff like this very often. So the attorney says this, again in the third person. Undersigned counsel is aware of the irony of his being placed in the position of having to make these objections, particularly because the undersigned, right, the attorney, is representing an accused who has been identified as serving as a source. The undersigned chose years ago not to represent individuals who cooperate with the government. There's a lot of attorneys that don't want to do that. You know, they don't like the complications. They don't like the shadiness on the side of the government. They just don't want to deal with that extra hiccup. They're defense people, and a lot of defense people don't want to work with folks that are cooperating. Again, maybe you're a defendant technically, but you're working with the prosecutor, so you might as well be them. So that's not entirely unusual. The undersigned took on Mr. Soto's case based on what the FPD, which is the Federal Public Defender's Office, characterized as a request from the court, given that so many other counsel had conflicts in the matter. Again, not unusual, right? There's not a million attorneys who handle cases like this, you know. So, clearly he had an attorney before this. It says, as well as because Mr. Soto was described as a person. Wait, I missed it. There's a request from the court, given that so many other counsel had conflicts in the matter, as well as because Mr. Soto was described as a person who was not under a cooperation agreement and was having trouble with his assigned counsel. That was the part I wanted to get to. So he had an attorney before, like I said, wanted to drop that attorney. The Federal Public Defender's Office looked around at attorneys that are on their list, right? Private attorneys, but they're on their list to be able to handle cases. Get at them. This attorney's like, hey, is he cooperating? Like, did he flip? No, he didn't flip. He's not cooperating. All right, cool. I'll step in. Why not? The history, and then he gets blindsided with all this shit. The history of Mr. Soto's case has been instructive for the undersigned because it is clear that he has been viewed as an expendable commodity by various stakeholders in the investigation and litigation of this case. Regardless of who or what Mr. Soto's past is, he is entitled to be treated fairly. And I agree. Right, I agree, and I think the attorney is right for making this point. The government knew that he was playing with fire, talking to them. They didn't care. You know, he chose not to go through with it, or he didn't go all the way through with it, or whatever the case may be. That means you're still the enemy, right? From a prosecutor's standpoint, You're either on my team or you're the ops, right? And Soto, Drifter, flirted with joining the team, but apparently decided against it. Well, then you're still the ops. I don't give a fuck about you, right? I don't care about your safety. I care about your wife's safety. I just cared about you when I thought I was going to get you on my team so that I can do what I want to do and lock all these fools up. But now that you're not on my team, I don't care about you. And they hung him out to dry. And of course, the other attorneys don't care about him. They care about their client. Man, can we find some evidence of some shady shit here that could help my guy? Right? Can I highlight, maybe Soto's not credible. Maybe this. Who knows? What did he say? And what were these negotiations? Was his attorney in the room when we were talking defense strategy? And yet he was doing prosecution work with his client? Like, maybe that'll help us. Everybody's out for themselves. And look, I don't encourage people to tell, for sure. But I don't encourage them not to either. Everybody, as I say all the time, has to do whatever they think is right for the situation that they're in. And you got to be able to look yourself in the mirror. But man, if you're going to tell, like, now the rest of his life on SNY yards in California, labeled a rat and all this other shit, right? He's going to get all the labels, but he didn't get, I guess, the benefit, so to speak, of telling, which sounds kind of weird to say, because he pulled back and wanted to stay solid, but he don't get the benefit of staying solid either because you didn't stay solid all the way. It's that 1 foot in, 1 foot out. That should get you hurt. That should get you hurt. That gets you in a bind. Do what you're going to do and take what comes with it, regardless of what that's going to be. You're going to flip, and take what comes with it. You're going to not, then don't. But these feds and these investigators, for the DAs and these prosecutors and these federal agents, they're smart. They're smart. They've been doing this for a long time. They've gotten a lot of people to flip. It's just further demonstration, in case anybody needed it, that just because somebody doesn't get on the stand and point fingers doesn't mean that they didn't talk, right? And there are many, many people who don't talk at all, right? So don't get me wrong. And you can't put jackets on people without proof, in my view. It's just a messy situation all the way around. And again, I think it's an angle of our legal system and these gang cases and these RICO indictments and all this stuff that we don't normally get a behind the scenes look at, but this is the reality. It's dirty. It's dirty all the way around, so there you have it. Help Others Move in Excellence. There's not really a way for me to link to this document. Maybe I'll put it up on my Patreon. I'll link to that first case I was talking about, though, the case that got Drifter incarcerated, in case any of you guys want to read his appeal and get the details on that. But help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time because you're worth it. Help your community because they need you. And, the best way to avoid all this stuff is to not engage in behavior that can have you in an indictment. That's how I stay out of jail. I stay out of jail by not doing shit that's going to get me put in jail. Anyways, you guys have a good one, man. Stay tuned. A lot more content coming.